itself was a little bit less intense. And they were actually really wanting submissions, so I think they're excited to see submissions come along, whereas NASPA probably receives, thousands of submissions and they pick, they can't pick all of them. But I think this conference picked most presentations that were submitted, so.
So now that you've each presented at least once, how has that changed your drafting a proposal? Or has it? Or your strategy of the way you do that? Or the types of topics that you would be interested in proposing?
I guess for me, I think I feel more comfortable now presenting at a professional conference than I have before, in terms of just knowing that, especially this last conference that I presented at, it was a Students of Color conference, and there was a woman in there in my workshop who worked for a financial aid office. And so she asked a student asked a question in terms of, if you don't use your work study money, then what happens with it? And I was like, well, if you don't use it, you don't get it, but if you want money, then you can get it through a loan. And she was like, actually, no, you actually can get a grant. And I was like, no. And so I was able to clarify that in the room, and then later she came up to me and was like, thank you so much. I was telling students this information and it was wrong. And it was like, so that really validated my knowledge and my experience. And yeah, so that experience was really important for me. Yeah.
Oh, actually, my question goes along with that. And I know that kind of goes into the presentation experience, but since you touched on it, Claudia, I just wanted to ask you guys all about that. It's like, what happens if you're asked a question that you may not know the answer to? Like, how do you respond in that situation, or how have you responded to a situation if it's happened?
Great question.
Because I think that's my number one fear, is getting up there and be like, I know the answer to that.
I think I kind of had an out because I was supposed to be co-presenting with Erica, but she couldn't travel at the time, so I was kind of like the ambassador, and I was like, that's a great question. I can put you in touch with my advisor, and I'll do my best to answer your question. And I think an important thing that I decided to do is just kind of like a disclaimer, like, even though I've been a part of this process, I'm by no means an expert, so we're kind of learning through this together. So I just kind of established that environment right from the beginning, so I didn't have to feel like, oh gosh, did I say the right thing or anything? So
that didn't happen when I was presenting, but I always think about like the professor trick where they turn it back around and ask the audience, like, what do you guys think is the answer?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Who can speak to that?
Yeah.
It's a really good idea.
It has happened to me, and I'm honest with it. I'm like, I really don't know, but I do know this.
Okay.
And so it's definitely connected to what they asked, but I don't know the answer, and you don't want to give erroneous information.
Yeah.
And so it has happened to me, and I always, just kind of say, I don't know. But
Okay. That's good.
So I guess a question on drafting a proposal. Could you talk a little bit about how the written narrative of the proposal sounds or feels or looks like, in terms of how much in-text citation is there? Maybe you could speak to the differences in the conferences you are. Is it more like I statements? Is it written more like a research paper? Because I know all of them look a little different, so I was wondering if you could speak to how it's written in its narrative form at the different conferences.
Mine was definitely written more casually, like, we plan to propose this, we will do this. Definitely had some in-text citations to kind of validate why we thought our topic was important. So I definitely pulled multiple resources, but it was really, it was like a paragraph. So I think I'm trying to remember what it asked. It asked, like, what is our topic, what is our title, what is the program going to look like, what are your outcomes, and then, like, do you need, like technology support, or like videos or computer. But yeah, so the part that was the biggest part was like, what is the topic and what is the presentation going to look like? And for that section, it was definitely like, we plan to do this, we plan to use this. This is the theory that grounds our work, or that supports our, our proposal. So, but it was not as academically formal as other ones that I have seen.
So I didn't draft the proposals for the presentations that I did, but I can speak to what I remember from them. So for the AERA proposal, which was for a paper presentation, which is why the session was structured differently than ACPA, It was much more grounded in the research. It looked kind of like a mini research paper in itself. So it read very differently than the ACPA proposal and completely different from the process that I just went through for submitting for NASPA Regional. So I think it just depends on the nature of the conference and knowing what they're expecting, and then how you can play into their expectations and frameworks to really kind of improve your chances of being selected, and also make your presentation the best that it can be for that context.
Once you submit the proposal, what is the turnaround time? Usually when before you get the decision, and then I know that Katrina had mentioned this, but she had to leave. If you submit a proposal and it gets rejected, it gets turned down, at that point, I guess, what does the reflective process look like? Do you get feedback? Do you scrap it? You know, what, like, cry? What do you do? All of the above.
I've never gotten rejected. But I really haven't, but I've never really applied to, like, you know, to present at large conferences either. But I would imagine that turnaround time, it depends on the conference, and so one in a month and a half, I think, is pretty average. And they don't give you feedback on, like, oh, you should have done this or that differently. But for the type of person that I am, I would definitely go back and try to re-present on it. So I know that if for NASPA regionals I don't get accepted to present, I will want to present on that, because that's my area of study. That's what I'm going to go into my PhD in. So that's something that I would definitely go back and ask for feedback in terms of what can I have done differently. Not to, like, for example, Erica was the one that helped me for this one. So very presentation-like, very no I statements, like very like more research.
I was actually a program reviewer this year for the NASPA National Conference. And so in the fall, I spent a couple weeks reading through, I think I had 10 or 11 different program proposals to read through. And on the other side of the coin, when you're reviewing it, you had to fill out these big paragraph, lengthy sections until, I guess, so, you know, what's good about the proposal, what needs work, what would you recommend, yes or no, and then why. And so I know that, and I don't know if that goes to the reviewers or not, or it goes to the presenters or not, does it?
It does.
So for NASPA, I had to write like paragraphs as to why I thought this should or should not be approved. So I think that is definitely, it was interesting for me to be on the other side of that and to see what it looks like for those. But for my NODA regional conference, it was about 3 weeks or a month after I got our decision turnaround. And it was, they said, we want you to present and it's gonna be great and thank you. So, no feedback though.
All right, so moving on to the presentation experience, I know from speaking with Katrina and Stephanie that you guys had a technological snafu and that those things occur, and so maybe just what that looked like when you got there. What are some things that you were like, I wish somebody would have told me, or some things that you walked away with, both positive and negative, or things that you would strengthen later?
Well, our technology fiasco thing, I mean, is anything that could happen if you're just presenting for a class or something. So that was kind of dumb on our part to not load up the video ahead of time. But it wasn't a huge deal because there was only like 12 people in the room, so I mean, we just kind of moved on. And I guess the one thing, I was just like surprised how easy it was to present at a conference. You know, like nobody was there like trying to judge you or like make you feel bad. Like everybody was just had questions, and you know, I would say I was like, when I left, I was like, oh, okay, I think I would do this again.
So I'm thinking about the last presentation I did was at the Students of Color Conference, and they didn't provide technology, like in terms of they didn't provide a computer because it was more expensive for them, and they wanted to keep the cost of registration down for students. So I arrived, and they had told me that they would have the cable for Macs, you know how, whatever that cable is called, and they didn't, and so that was kind of stressful. Like, oh, we'll get it for you later. We'll get it for you later. We'll get it for you later, and it got to the point where I was like, it's half an hour before my presentation, like I was freaking out because I wouldn't be able to do it without it. But it worked out fine, and I was able to present. So I think that one of the things to keep in mind is that sometimes you will be presenting at conferences that try to keep the budget down, And because of that,